So first thing you should know is we don't know what's about to happen. We have no idea what's getting ready to go down. But we are here together, and so we'll make it work. I'm Jason Reynolds.
And I'm Ta-Nehisi Coates.
Yeah. I guess first I gotta be honest. It's kind of a bug out moment, right? It is what it is, but it's an honor, man. It's a pleasure to be here with you. I appreciate you. All the work that you've been doing, all the work that you have done. Congratulations on the new book. And let's just jump into it. I guess for me, man, we were just discussing, I want to know, and I know some other folks in the crowd probably want to know, how is it possible that Ta-Nehisi Coates, all of a sudden, was writing the Black Panther comic, right? Because for me, it's like, yo, how is that even a thing, right? Like, and so I guess, man, I would just love to know for my own selfishness how that even came to be.
Well, I mean, it's weird because you have your identity as you appear to most people, and then you have your private identity as, you know, people around you know you. And so, like, for a lot of people, it seems backwards to go from Between the World and Me to Black Panther. But in my mind, that's actually backwards. I started reading comic books when I was, 8 years old. Like, really, really young. And it was, I would say, you know, from comics that I got my literary sensibility, you know. So for me, it feels natural, even though it's not obvious. You know, everything that, you know, that happens with you isn't really public. I didn't know how to get into the comics industry. When I was a kid, I'm an old man, there was no internet. You know, so I didn't know, like how anyone actually became, you know, a writer for comics or a comic creator of any sort. I just had no idea. I used to, you know, have like tracing paper and, you know, trace the comics and do things like that. You know, but I didn't really know how to get from A to B. When I went to college, the road to journalism was relatively clear. And so that was, you know, the road I took. But for me, I feel like it very easily could have been the other way. I was lucky enough to be contacted by Marvel, you know, and to be offered the opportunity to write for them. And it was huge, you know. I probably shouldn't say this, but I feel like I would do this for free. And I'm kind of doing it for free. If you want to be real about it. No one goes into comics to get rich. But it's a pleasure, you know what I mean? Comics, they just have, you know, such a hold on the imagination, you know, of Americans. Even as you know, we have our problems with the audience for folks that actually read, you know, books. You can see like the influence, you know, in Hollywood, in movies, and in TV. And so to be a part of that and to be a part of something that helped make me, it was just a huge pleasure, you know? It was just serious.
Did you feel any pressure? Like, did you feel the weight of it all?
I did, but I didn't. I think there are different types of comic book fans. So I think, like, I was a much more private comic book fan. Like, when I went, I didn't really get on the internet and post things. I was never that sort of fan. I don't know, like I used to go to cons when I was a kid, but I would like go buy back issues and then go home. I didn't care about meeting Chris Claremont. Like, I never would have come to this panel. Like, I would have read, I would have read the work, but would have no interest at all in meeting the person who produced the work. Your heroes will always disappoint you. I didn't know that back then, but I just didn't, like, I didn't want to know, you know what I mean? It was some dude somewhere. I liked what he did. Okay, one day, you know, maybe I'd get to do it, but I didn't really want to know that person in that sort of way. So I think, though, the fair thing to do here is to do the turnabout and for you to talk about, like, how you ended up working on Miles Morales.
Yeah, it was completely different for me, man. First of all, I didn't grow up in the comic book, sort of as a comic book person. My older brother, hard-body comic book person, right? Like, just, he was all in it. He had this sort of, the cardboard, the plastic sleeves, you know, don't touch my stuff, right? Like, that kind of person.
Yeah, that was me.
That was you, right? And y'all are around the same age. It was like a big deal. For me, though, it was sort of comic book adjacent, right? Because at the same time, in the 80s and in the early 90s, you had all the cartoon series. You had the merchandise was huge, right? So the toys, and that's sort of where my sweet spot. The video games. That's sort of where my sweet spot was. And so so my agent calls and she says, "Look, this is opportunity with Marvel, Disney. They want you to do Spider-Man." And I was like, "Spider-Man? No, I'm good." Now I love Spider-Man, but I'm like, I don't know what I could add to Spider-Man. I mean, that story's been told. We know Peter's story. We know the different iterations of Peter's story. I'm not sure I have anything extra to tell about Peter Parker. And they're like, "Well, they want you to do Miles Morales." Now, at first, I was like, the name sounds familiar. And I knew I knew about the Donald Glover sort of, that whole thing, right, which was the sort of catapulted this into existence. And then to make it clear, they're like, Miles Morales, he's like, half black, half Puerto Rican. And for me, it's like, all right, well, I mean, I'm listening now, right? I'm like, oh, wow, okay. And so when I signed on, it was the craziest thing, man. Because when I say that I'm going to do it, I get invited to the Disney office. And this is the thing that it's part of the story that I don't tell it often, but it's a wildest moment because I go to the Disney office, and I've never been in the Disney office, and that alone was sort of like strange and interesting, and like, wow, this is like, there's art all over the wall, and you're dealing, all that kind of stuff. And then they say, all right, we're going to have like a champagne toast. And I'm like, this is starting off so sweet, right? I'm like, this is great.
I didn't get a champagne toast.
See, you got, And then I got the champagne out, and unexpectedly, I'm not even thinking about it. They say, well, now we've gathered everybody together to sort of celebrate this new venture. Why don't you tell us about, what you want to do? Now, I hadn't even thought about it, right? But now I'm holding the flute in my hand. There's like cupcakes, right? And I hadn't really thought about what I wanted to do with the character because I was still learning so much about. I wasn't a comic book person. I'm playing catch up. And so in that moment, I start thinking about what I would have wanted to see, right? Like when I was 15, 16, or furthermore, what I want to see now.
Wait, but what did you say in the moment?
In the moment, I was like, okay, right?
No, when they said, what do you want to do? Like, what did you
okay, so this is like what I said. I said, well, in my head, I'm going, think quickly, right? But I started to think about me, right? And I'm like, well, here's the thing. The one thing that stood out to me, and this is what I have been thinking about on the way there, is that like Peter Parker's famous thing, which is with great power comes great responsibility. And I think it's a powerful, powerful statement. This is probably now, I'm going to get myself in trouble. But it's also a statement that I never would have said when I was 16. Because in my neighborhood, the neighborhoods that I grew up in, there were no kids in my community that would have been like, yo, son, if we had more power, you know what we do with it? Be more responsible. You feel me? And that's not, you see what I'm saying? Like, that wouldn't have been the thing, right? And so, I mean, that's real. And so for me, I wanted to sort of pick at what that means for a kid who wakes up and realizes that he has a superpower, right? If you think about like NBA players, right? If you're coming from specific communities, I know you're from Baltimore. If you're coming from certain communities and you wake up one day and you got $20 million, for a lot of those young people, that's a superpower, and you've never had it before, and you're expected to be able to manage it. So why don't we show, like, what is it like to have a superpower when you're the only one with one in your community? Why don't we talk about, and this is what I'm telling the Disney office, right? Why don't we discuss survivor's guilt, which a lot of us have. Right? If you're coming from neighborhoods and you get out of the neighborhood and you come back to the hood and your neighborhood is still your neighborhood, but you are no longer the same, right? And I'm sure a lot of us have dealt with that kind of experience. It's like, what is that like to be the quote-unquote special one, right? And then lastly, what about the deep-seated sort of feeling that so many people have in certain communities, specifically communities of color, specifically poorer communities of color, where there's this feeling of inferiority, this pathology of inferiority that you start to actually believe, even though it isn't actually true, where you don't feel like you deserve to be a superhero. And so these are the things that I wanted to talk about. And so I pitched this to Disney, flying by the seat of my pants, hoping, and mind you, I'm thinking, this ain't gonna fly, right? They getting ready to take the champagne flute back, right? Spit it out, right? But it ended up being what Miles ended up being about, man.
So do you, the thing I had to ask though with that, knowing just a little bit about your background, how much of that is you?
A lot of that, man. A lot of that. I come from, my family dynamics are, besides a Puerto Rican mother, but my family dynamics are similar to his. My father wasn't there, but the rest of it in terms of the way that they're speaking and the glue to that family, even thinking about when I'm home now, or even thinking about when I go back to Brooklyn and I'm hanging out in Brooklyn, it is interesting, and I'm around kids all the time too, and thinking about how I feel so lucky. When I'm with my older brother, I feel extremely lucky because he wasn't so fortunate, and his opportunities were snatched. Right, the ones that he had were snatched, and he was never able to take new opportunities because of certain circumstances in his life. And so this book is for him. It's dedicated to him, a kid who grew up on comic books, who believed in superpowers and superheroes, but who never was able to actualize his own superpower in the way he wanted to because of circumstances and because of environment and because of one or two bad decisions that the environment helped to create. So
yeah, no, it's kind of sad you didn't read comic books as a kid, because I think actually the themes you're elucidating, right, like that's what attracted me. That's in that. I was a huge Spider-Man head when I was a kid, Peter Parker, and nothing ever goes right.
Right. He's a regular dude. He's a regular kid.
And it's like the idea of being special or having superpowers, like I guess like the ordinary impression of that, and I'm not telling you guys nothing you don't know, but the ordinary impression of that, at least what I thought before I was reading comic books, was like everything would be grand.
Right.
Do you know what I mean? Like the idea that if you're, given something, like if you're fortunate, if you've been blessed in a certain way, everything will be great. And Parker can't get far enough away from it.
Right. Exactly.
You know what I mean? It's always this internal conflict. And that is so, and I know, Stan Lee is as far from West Baltimore as you can get. Steve Ditko is as far from West Baltimore, as you can get. But like I felt that.
Yeah,
like
sure.
I really, really, felt that. And it's like a thing in art where even when you're talking about something that looks really, really specific, somehow somebody that's really, really far away, they get it.
The truths are the truths. You know what I
Right.
mean? But was it different? So thinking about like your sort of love for Spider-Man when you were younger, and then thinking about now how you're writing a king. Right. I mean, you're writing a person. Spider-Man is sort of this kid who is sussing through the uncomfortable normalcy of adolescence, and now you're writing like the king. I mean, this dude T'Challa is like the greatest king I've seen in a long time. Like,
but you know what? I think it. So there were two ways of approaching this, right? And the one way of approaching it, well, first I should say that in comics and in pop culture, there is a hunger, I think, among black fans to just see a black dude or a black woman just bust some ass. Like that's, like I just want to, I want to get the same sort of power trip that all these other, white fans get regularly watching, the Punisher or whoever bust some ass. I want to feel that. And maybe like 20 years, no, I don't think I would have. I don't think I would have. Because like, and again, as I said, they're different type of fans. It wasn't Spider-Man's power that drew me in. You know what I mean? It wasn't, Wolverine's power. That wasn't watching him bust ass that really got me. And I mean, that spectacle was important, but that wasn't, you know what I mean? Because if it was that, I would have, picked any number of action movies, and that would have, been the thing that really got me. But it was always the conflict. It was always, but this comes with something. And so when I went to Black Panther, I actually kind of went away from the impulse to watch him bust ass. Like that just don't interest me for some reason. I don't know why. What interested me a lot more was, yes, but what comes with the crown? You know what I mean? Like what's the flip side of that? Does this dude even want a crown? Like if he had, if he could design his life himself, is this where he would be? Is this how he would do it? And the fact that even that desire to do it differently does not give him a way out. The crown is a crown. You may not want it. It's not up to you. You was born into this. You know what I mean? You can't walk away from your nation, because even if you want it some other way, in some deep, profound way, you would walk away from yourself. So I was really, really interested in that.
How much research? Because the Black Panther comic has been around for a very, very long. I have my older brother. When I told him, I was like, Ta-Nehisi writing Black Panther. This is a while ago when you first started. He was like, man, let me give you some real black. This is my older brother. He's like, let me go ahead. He's like digging through he digging through the crates now, and he pulls out like an old from the 70s, I believe, and he's like, yo, this, just so you know, this ain't new. Just so you know, right? And I'm right. This is that because my brother, he likes to sun me like that, you know. And so like, how much research, or how much did that matter? Did you stick to some of that stuff, or were you kind of like, I'm gonna do my thing, you know?
No, I love, I know there's a whole thing about continuity, and there's a need for, And the general thing, I think, for a lot of writers and a lot of creators, at least in this generation, is, you know, if you dig into continuity, you turn off new readers, and that might be true. I mean, maybe I'm screwing up, but I love continuity. You know what I mean? Again, I come from a pre-internet generation, and if you picked up, like I did, you know, Uncanny X-Men, you know, I don't know, 205 or whatever. Nobody was going to tell you what happened in 204. Like, you know, like if you was, like I can remember being a kid watching the cartoon, Spider-Man is Amazing Friends, Magneto's a villain, right? And then I pick up the comic and he's with the X-Men. But nobody's going to tell you, like, what happened. There's no, let me Google, you know what I mean? No, you can't Google anything.
Right.
Either you in or you not. You know what I'm saying? And then, you know, when a con comes to town, you can try to find the back issues that might, you know, help you piece it together. Ain't nobody holding your hand for this, though. Either you with it or you're not with it, you know? And that's I know that's an arch, maybe anti-reader approach, but I love that because as a reader, it meant the world is actually like that.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? You walk out on the street, see somebody get punched in the face, you know what I mean? Like, you know, when I was a kid, I don't know what happened here. I can't Google what, you know, my smartphone, what happened? What's the beef between this dude?
Right. Either you in it or you not in it.
You get it, you know what I'm saying? And you might never know. You might never know, you know what I mean? And so, like that style of writing, you know, was very, very appealing, you know, to me. Some people gonna get it, and some people, you know, they just not. It's just not, you know, it's not for them, you know?
So, just a quick, this is just a question about the craft-wise, because it's different. I mean, you write, obviously, you do a lot of essay work, it's a lot of prose, right? You're writing, obviously, in long form. What was different about writing something that is so, it's almost like script, almost?
Yeah.
Like, was that challenging for you? And I noticed that in your versions of it, it almost, to me, as somebody whose original discipline was poetry, it feels very lush, it feels very poetic, to me, and that's my, you know, if some of the, especially when Tikala's thinking, right? It all feels very poetic. I mean, it's really stunning, the language of it. And so I guess I want to know, what was the transition in terms of just the process of writing it? Not the process in terms of editorial stuff, but just like how different was that to change gears up here?
Well, I mean, and yeah, you know, like my first real discipline was poetry too. So that's how I started actually. There's a lot in common, and I knew like going into comics that like it was significantly less words. Like you have like less words than, you know, I was used to writing it. But it would shock you how much less. And that was like a process of really getting that. I mean, there are issues of Black Panther that like I can't look at. Like I always have problems looking at, you know, work that I've done in the past, you know what I mean? Because in anything you're doing, honestly, if you're doing it right, you're getting better and learning, you know, the whole way. If you're not, then you really need to go do something else. And so there are issues where I'm like, blocks of text. I'm like, oof. You know what I mean? Like this doesn't, now part of that was being an essayist, but part of it was in the generation of comic books I came up in, you know, the Claremonts, for instance, there was much more tolerance for that. There's much more indulgence of these, you know, where the text, you know, almost blocks out the art. I had to learn to not write like that.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like, I really had to learn that, like, the vast majority of my script should be talking to the artist. It should not actually be, I'm talking like 80-90% of it should be that. You know what I mean? Like, it's a high. I mean, I just closed out a script right now where there's, like, almost no talking for the entire issue. You know, it's like a jailbreak script all the way through. And there's like no talking. And at that point that I did that, I was like, God damn, this is fun. Like now I don't want to talk at all. Like right. if I could do every issue like that, you know. I mean, you know, one of the things I think about with this though is like when you do superheroes, even if you're doing them like in comic book or in novel form, like you have to dive into something that's already done. Like you were asking this question about continuity, which is unlike your YA work, which is obviously just you.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? So how difficult was it to like find yourself within?
I mean, it was tricky. I mean, look, there was a bit of I got away with a little bit because there's not so much backstory, right? He doesn't have quite the history. He doesn't have nowhere near the history of Peter Parker or of many characters in the Marvel universe, just because he's a fairly new character. And so because of that, I kind of had a little bit of wiggle room that perhaps you didn't have. The difference, though, is that because it's a novel form, there could be no holes, right? Because if you're writing it so like if it's serialized and if it's in comic book form, the arc is longer. Because you can sort of spread and stretch the arc over the course of 200 issues or however long it is. And so you have time to go back and be like, and this explains what happened 100 issues ago, right? This is why this happened. You thought I didn't remember, but I remembered, right? Whereas in a novel, like that can't happen, because if it does, it just makes it feel like your novel is poorly written, right?
But one of the things with comics, in the same way, like I've learned this too, you can't overdo that. Like, it's got to be set up.
Right.
Like, you can't, like, it's hard to, like, if something happened back here, let's say 5 issues ago, and you want to come back to it over here, the setup better be right. It can't be, like, sudden and very exposition-y and ha, this is what I was actually doing.
Like, gotcha.
And then flash back. Because he'd be like, nah, come on, man. We can see, we can see the architecture. We know that's...
Right, you don't want to feel like somebody's fixing a mistake. You know what I mean?
Right.
Like,
exactly.
Yeah. But that was the whole thing. I think that's where the pressure for me came in. It was like, there are a lot of people who know this character. There are a lot of people who want to know this character. You really can't afford to mess this up. And so make sure that every decision that you make, which is how you write a novel, right? In general, right? Make sure that every decision that you make, is explained, right? And it doesn't have to be explained in some sort of hokey, didactic way, but it just needs to make sense. It can't be, you can't leave the holes. You don't have, there can be no setup. Like, there could be a setup and sort of a knockdown, but it has to happen within this sort of space. You don't have, the longer arc. You don't have, 3 or 4 more issues to go before you can explain it. And I think that was the most complicated part. How do you fit all of this into a couple of weeks of this kid's life? Knowing that he still has to be Spider-Man, he still exists already. There's still characters in the book that everybody already knows, like who's his uncle, who's like what happened to his uncle? His uncle, is he dead? Is he alive? And then dealing with also sort of all of the different universes and figuring out which universes you're going to pull from to create this sort of amalgam of a story, right? It's like you got the Ultimate Universe, you got the Marvel Universe, right? And like he exists in all those spaces, and that part for me was like, wait.
So wait, were you free from that though to make could you dip and dive?
I could basically present elements. I could say, look, this is what I want to keep from this particular universe. This is what I want to keep from this particular universe to make this particular story, right? So it's like sometimes his mom knows that he's Spider-Man, sometimes his mom doesn't know. I decide to use the one that doesn't know, right? Sometimes his uncle is alive and sometimes his uncle is dead. I decide to use the one where his uncle's dead, right? It's like making decisions to better suit the plot line that I was trying to construct by using all the universes and be like, I'll take that and that and that and that and not that and not that and not that to form a story. It was like a grab bag and mad stressful. But
So do you think about writing comics now? Like, would you try it?
I haven't tried. I think I'm interested. You should. There's cameras in here, bro. You're like, I think
I'm a journalist, man.
Exactly.
That's what I do.
I think I'm interested. It's outside of my wheelhouse, which is fine. I'm a little reticent because I don't really know how to do it. I've tried to write a movie script one time, and it was so bad that it makes me I'm a little gun shy, right? It's like, I don't know, because I know it's similar to script writing. But I'm interested. It's appealing to me. What you do in Black Panther is appealing to me, right? And so I'm like, I don't know. Like,
you should try
Ta-Nehisi's doing it. Right? That's what we all think.
Anybody can do it. Clearly, this dude's doing it. Anyone can do it. If he can do it.
He can do it. I at least gotta try to do it.
No, you should. I would actually urge you to try, and I think it will teach you things about other forms of writing. I mean, I can't tell you what it's like to try to tell a story and to think like visually in that way. Like, it's so weird. Like, I remember, like, for the first arc for Black Panther, and I actually did this for the second arc too, and I'm not going to do this afterwards. It's like, all right, here are the things that I want to happen, right? And I knew that, but I wasn't thinking in terms of scenes. And then you go to write it, and it's like, oh, but how does this person get into the room? What does that room actually look like? You know what I mean? What was happening in that room before? When does that conversation begin? When do we actually need it to begin? I was like, and because of the form, because you only have 20 pages, which you'll relate back to because of poetry, there's something incredibly beautiful about that. I needed, just a couple weeks, I was writing this script, and I needed T'Challa to have a conversation with his mother. But it was going to take too long. Like, I didn't have enough space to allow for his mother to, I don't know, hey, T'Challa, it's Ramonda. Hey, how's it going, Mom? What's going on? You know what I mean? Like, I didn't have enough space for that, right? And it's not even to say that you had to do that, but the way it was fitted, it wasn't going to work. So I just had him walking down the hall, and they have like this sort of technology in their braces. I just had the technology, the text just come through as he was going into the next scene. And I got it done like in basically like a page, you know what I mean, into the next page. And so it looked cool to me. We'll see how it comes out. But I felt like it looked cool, and I was able to save space. Like, getting your brain to work in that different way, like that sort of cross training, I would highly encourage it.
Well, you heard it here first, y'all. If it happens, I'll give all the credit to him, you know what I mean? All right, so we're gonna open it up for some Q&A. I hope y'all got questions. If you don't, shame on you. All right.
Okay. Hey, what's up? I'm Darren. Yeah, like, I definitely like watching Black people in comics kick ass. It's not always the focal point. I like what you did with Black Panther in terms of moving it away from him just being a superhero, more towards like being a leader and having to deal with people. But I wonder if some of the impulse was also to maybe avoid some tropiness in like previous renditions of Black Panther. Did you set out to reestablish how mainstream audiences view this character?
No, but I do think the fact that I had seen Hudlin's version kick plenty of ass. I had seen, that was like when Priest was going into it, that was his thing. It's like, yo, you got to respect this dude. So I felt like he was, from a power, I felt like he was respected. You know what I mean? I felt like I actually didn't have to establish that he wasn't a joke in the way that, Christopher Priest felt like he had to establish this dude, he ain't no punk. But I felt like everybody knew that by now. You know what I mean? He was cool. Everybody felt like he wasn't no punk. So I felt free to engage other aspects of him and to really try to, get in his head. And I'm in fact, really, really thankful for that. I caught him also at a very, very interesting point. The tagline on Wakanda was "Wakanda has never been conquered," and I caught him after Wakanda had been conquered 2-3 times, some crazy amount of time. It actually was getting kind of cliche. But what it opened up for me to do is then to ask of him, and actually to ask of the nation, if you were thousands of years old, and if you've never been, and then suddenly you are several times over, a relatively short period of time, what does that do to how you feel about yourself? How do you think about your nation then? How do you think about your king? How does your king think about himself? It was just so much narrative juice that to walk away from that, I just thought, would have been criminal.
So sort of related to the end of your last question, but as you approach the sort of new series and everything in our new political era, do you find yourself thinking about Black Panther, like the character and the leader, differently? Are you trying, is there a different message, or is it the same? Like, do you feel like, you have to address kind of what's going on in our political
No, not
era?
really, actually. Not really. I mean, we just wrapped up Black Panther and the Crew, and so there was some of, obviously, like, actually a lot of what was going on in there. But I think we got him going pretty well. I think he's all right.
Hey, I have a question for each of you, if that's if I can do a separate question, if that's okay. So Ta-Nehisi, you were on Pod Save America like earlier this week, and you were talking about how they asked you about the what's the appeal of superheroes nowadays, black superheroes nowadays, and
He said superheroes in general.
well,
Yeah.
he said superheroes, yeah, and then you said it was because of escapism. I don't know if there was like enough time to like elaborate on that, but can you elaborate on that, like your answer with that?
Yeah.
In what way do we need escapism that we're into like superheroes? I think with everything going on, I feel like it's like a very easy way to like an easy out on like the way to answer that question. So yeah.
You want to pose the second one too?
Huh? Oh, the second one for Jason. When you write for Miles Morales, and the fact that he's a young teenager, does that make it like harder for you to write as him? Because you have to deal with things like curfews and high school parents and all that. Does that make for like a little bit like trickier writing? And cause I know would it be easier if he was like an adult, like with more freedom?
So why don't you go first?
To answer your question, I think it's way more awesome to write him as a teenager. I mean, he's a teenager. Like, look, I think that the beauty of writing Miles as a 15-year-old is that you can't be focused on the fact that he's Spider-Man, right? That Spider-Man is literally sort of secondary in his life because he's still a 15-year-old boy who has to deal with 15-year-old boy things. He has to deal with, his family and making sure. And furthermore, I think as a teenager, what you get to see is everything that he's experiencing in his life in terms of his friendships, his family, his community, the barbershop, whatever, all the things that all the spaces he's navigating, all it does is it buttresses who he is as Spider-Man, right? So I don't have to spend so much time trying to explain why he is the kind of Spider-Man he is, because all of that is exposed in his day-to-day life as a regular kid. Instead of disconnecting those things, it's like saying no. And you also get to play around with this idea that like if he's a teenager growing up in Brooklyn and like living in that particular space, things like Spidey sense don't serve as superpowers, right? Spidey sense is survival, right? For him, it's like I got intuition because I grew up in Brooklyn and I got to navigate the space, right? Like that's all that, right? And so I got to sort of do that kind of thing too, and that was a lot of fun actually.
So I think what they were asking me about, at least as I understood the question, was the movies, like superhero movies, and why they were so big right now. And I do think a lot of that is escapism. I say that as somebody who, as I said on Pod Save America, I'm biased, so I love the Marvel movies. I say it as somebody that loves those movies. I think we have, and I would differentiate that from the comic books, which I don't think superhero comics give much escape. I think that's actually, I think it's a bad place to go for escape, actually. People get killed, all sorts of horrible things happen, and everything does not always end up well. I don't think, whatever you think of Secret Empire, I don't think people found that to be escapist at all. Whatever the critique is of it. But I do think, there's a kind of a power fantasy, man. That I think powers, most superhero, and maybe the entire action movie genre, but certainly most superhero films. There's a desire, I think, to believe, and I always got to check myself when I'm writing a comic book, that some sort of being with more power than us, but a correct, sense of morality will come down and save us and make everything okay. I don't know how many, people go see, the average, Marvel movie. When Avengers comes out, I don't know how many people that's going to be. But I got to say, man, after, coming through, an election with tremendous consequences, and I'm sorry to bring this note of reality into it, but where the actual vote, declined, where the level of engagement, declined, I mean, that you know, I can't but take a kind of, I can't help but take a kind of message from that, you know, where people are fanatical, you know, about them. They become huge, huge events, you know, in the way that our politics, which is right now killing us, which is a mortal danger to all. There will be no superhero movies. Do you understand? Like, that's like where we're headed. And that we don't have that kind of engagement there. You know, I think people just, you know, feel a kind of powerlessness and they just check out, man. You know, so let me just hit up this Thor. I love Thor. I'm going to go see Thor. You know what I'm saying? I'm into Thor. I got nothing against, you know, Thor. But there's a kind of, you know, let me just, you know, see this real quick and, you know, get my life. You know, which I respect. That's fine. You know what I mean? Other people have other ways of doing that. But just the, you know, the relatively paltry level, you know, of our engagement in the public sphere, I can't help but contrast those two things.
Hello. I have a question for kind of both of you and also for Jason. So, Jason, actually both of you, you're talking about politics, and I guess this leads into this. When you think about your outside experiences, outside politics things, I know, Jason, you kind of slid something in there with the teacher and the politically incorrect things the teacher was doing in class for Miles. But how does that inform your writing? And the second question is, why did they pick you guys? What do you think about yourself or your writing made them say, hey, I need to holler at y'all to write these two pieces?
Well, for me, in terms of the teacher, because I don't want to, for anyone who hasn't read it, I don't want to spoil it. Teacher wild, though. The teacher is wild. The teacher is wild. I guess, look, I spend a lot of time with kids, right? I'm in spaces, I do 100, 120 school visits a year. And I'm in front of a lot of teenagers ranging from, you know, 8 all the way up, kids ranging from 8 all the way up to 18. And the one thing that I see, depending upon, and actually not even just depending upon, the truth is that no matter what school you're in, you're going to find certain students who are being mistreated. Right? And they're being mistreated for a variety of reasons, right? Sometimes that's because they come from the quote-unquote wrong neighborhoods, or they have the wrong kinds of families, or they're the only Muslim in the school, which I experienced, right? A kid who's being mistreated because he was the only Muslim in his school, and it became a whole thing at a presentation that I was at, right? And so I wanted to make sure that I because Miles is a teenager, he's going to spend most of his life in school, right? The majority of his day is spent in school, and so when I was going to spin a tale about where the evils lie, it was easiest for me to set it in that particular framework and to sort of poke at the idea that there are a lot of young people who are being mistreated, and that mistreatment leads to all sorts of different consequences, whether it be suspension, expulsion, and if we were going to speak candidly, right? Basically, the book is all about school to prison pipeline. There you go. So, you know, and it's about trying to figure out, is there a way for us to talk about that under the guise of Spider-Man and to really sort of not bring light to it, because I think that people do understand the idea around it, but to show it in a way where it's like, this isn't as fantastic, right? And I mean that in terms of like fantasy. This isn't as sort of imaginative as it seems, that it's actually a little more realistic than we like to give credit to. And in terms of why they picked me, I don't know. You know, I mean, look, I'm spending most of my life writing books about young black boys, and trying my best to write. I try to write nuanced and balanced, and try to give some scope to what it means to be a young black boy in America. And there is no one answer to that. There is no one sort of thing, right? And so I try to show, even within the individual stories, all the different kinds, right? This idea of what does it mean to be young and black and male in America, just because I don't think we get enough of that narrative. We get a sliver of it, and it's like, yo, tisk, 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 or it's like, yo, he's going somewhere. He's not like the rest of them. And I think, well, there's like a big old spectrum, and all of us most of us fit on all of the dots in that spectrum. And I want to sort of do a better job at showing whole images of young black boys. So I guess that's why they call it, you know.
So just to pick up, I think it's really hard to get people to pick up comic books. And I think comic book publishers live in a state of fear all the time. And I'm just being real here. I think I was called because I had a name. And then it's up to me to try to be something more than a name. you know. In terms of politics, Marvel comics, at least, you know, during the time I was there, they're just suffused with them. They always have been. You know, there's this movement now. Why are you putting politics in my comic books?
Yeah.
I mean, come on, dude. Come on, buddy. You know, so, I mean, this is not new, right? Like, I'm doing, you know what I mean? It's like, what do you think X-Men is? What do you think Captain America is?
Exactly.
Like, what was Captain America? The dude's name is Captain America. The uniform is made out of a flag. He's apolitical. It's hilarious. You know what I mean? I mean, it really is. It's actually funny. You know what I mean? And you gotta laugh to keep from crying. So, so I'm writing Black Panther. That's his name. Black Panther. It's gonna be political. I mean, I don't know how you make it not, like, you gotta actually do something to not make it political. You know what I mean? That would be the strange thing to do. So for me, it was traditional. I mean, it was not, I mean, what else was there gonna be? There was nowhere else to go but politics. You know what I mean? And so that is a central through line, you know, in almost any great, you know, sort of, any comic book I loved.
Yeah.
You know, now you can, you know, say, well, this is about this. I bet you there is not, if I actually read it and looked at it and thought about it, there is not a single great comic book arc, and maybe not a single great story ever told without any sort of political implications. I just don't believe in it.
It's so crazy because it's, when I turned in the first draft, right, and I'm like, man, they getting ready to flag this all over the place, all right, and I literally was like, here you go. This is what I wanted to say, you know what I mean? And they sent back the editorial letter, and this is when I was like, yo, I have so much respect, that, you know, and they sent back the editorial letter and it said, hey, we see what you're trying to say. We can tell that you're being a little timid about it. Don't worry. If you're gonna say it, let's go. Like, push it. Like if you want to be political, let's go. Like, push it. And I was like, oh, all right. Yeah. And then we were good, you know.
Hi, back here. So I am a performing arts teacher. I actually have 3 students with me right here. It's like, hey, hi. And there are more at the Javits Center wandering around. So I work with 5th through 8th grade in general, but I have my high schoolers who stay with me forever, and I'm never letting them go. I know you guys creatively have very clear points of view when you're like creating your comics. I've read both, and but you also seem to have a very clear socio-political point of view as well that you place within the stories that you build. And so I'm actually just asking for advice as a performing arts teacher who feels a responsibility to teaching my kids. I teach all Black and brown kids, and I feel a responsibility. Even before all that has happened in the world in the last whatever, I've always felt that responsibility to teach them through art how to express who they are, how to tell their own stories. And do you have advice? Because I know when you're going into your art, you have a way of thinking about it, but how do I bring that to my kids? Do you guys have advice in that way, of ways that I can bring that into my classroom when I'm teaching that range of ages, but they're all, you know, the kids I teach are inner city kids, Black and brown, affected by so many of the things that are happening. And I get it, but I don't want to put my perspective on them. I want them to kind of, you know, I want to create a space as opposed to kind of militarizing them in my own way.
I was not a good student. I'm the wrong. I mean, notoriously bad. So.
But we're talking performing arts, though. Performing arts. So there's like a little looser space there.
I think, so, everybody take a picture of him deferring to me, you know what I'm saying?
You got to know what you don't know. You really got to know what you don't know, man.
You know what? I think one thing that I wish I was told, so I'll say that. One thing I wish I was told was that for me, because the performing arts that I worked in there, I did poetry and I did all these things. And I think, but when I was in school, the tricky part about language, especially for the young people who are dealing with language, if you're working with language, I think the tricky part about language is that all of the academy will tell you that the language that is most familiar to you is improper. And there's something really complicated about this, right? Like, and it doesn't mean that there shouldn't be a quote unquote, and I don't know if there should be, but I don't know if, I know that there is a quote unquote standard, right? But I think what happens when we're teaching the standard is that we often teach it while also invalidating the language that seems and comes natural to them, right? The language of their families, the language of their communities, the language of grandma, you know, like this sort of thing that it feels natural in my mouth, right? The way that the words feel in here, you're telling me is wrong. You're telling me is improper, and that's always been a bummer. It's always bothered me because it's really difficult for me to develop a relationship with language or even with expressing myself. In my entire life, you've been telling me that the way that expression comes across is improper. And so the one thing that I wish I would have been told was that it was valid, right? And that it was valuable, right? That the way that I wanted to put it on the page, right? I love We Real Cool, right? Like what was that? Gwendolyn Brooks, yeah? We Real Cool, right? And the funny thing about recently, there's this thing that's been circulating around the internet, right? And it's like Gwendolyn Brooks at 16. And it's like this list that she wrote when she was 16 years old, and it was like, write every day, work on novel every day, work on a script every day, play music all these things that she wanted to do. And then one of them said, speak proper English. And then she would grow up to write We Real Cool. And it's something about that, right? Because at 16, she's in the academy. She's in the academy at 16, right? She's learning how to be standardized, right? She's learning what it's going to take for you to navigate the world. And one of those things is to speak proper English. But somewhere along the line, she had to dismantle the rule. It was like, yeah, I have to learn the rules so that I can break the rules because there's freedom in the breaking of the thing, right? And for me, this is my opinion. And so I think that when you think about Gwendolyn Brooks and you think about speak proper English, is what she was telling herself to practice every day, and then who grew up to write We Real Cool, which feels so normal to me, so natural, so familiar to me. There's power in that. And so for the young people in the back, wherever you are, put your hands up so we can at least see y'all, you know what I'm saying? We want to honor you. I think I just say to y'all, be not afraid to get loose with it. Be not afraid to let yourself be as loose as possible and put it on the page or put it on the stage however it feels good to you, because if it feels good to you, it's going to feel good to the rest of us 9 times out of 10.
I know what you don't know, see? I knew what I was doing when I was deferring. Y'all was like, why is he deferring? It's like, I knew what I was doing.
Hello, back here. So my question is, you guys get the opportunity to create your comic, your own superhero, their nemesis. What do they look like? What are their powers? What are they battling? What does that look like?
Oh, man. Defer time.
I'm certainly not going to tell you. You're going to have to wait on that. I'm sorry.
I have no idea. That's a good question. I don't know. We've been stumped, you know.
Coming, sorry.
Mr. Coates, you mentioned before that you thought Marvel called you up because you had a name. Now, I primarily know you.
Wait, sorry, say that again?
You thought that Marvel gave you the call because you have a name. People know you. I know you mostly through The Atlantic. So it definitely worked. I picked up Black Panther because I heard Ta-Nehisi Coates is writing him. Are there any fellow Atlantic writers you think, like, these guys should be writing comic books also? Anyone that you're going to call up Marvel, like, hire this guy?
You know what's funny? On our Slack channel, we have a comics chat. Like, there are enough fans there that we actually have a comics chat where we actually talk. I don't know, man. I think if you're willing to do the hard, it's tough. It's really, really tough. And there's no money in it. So you got to have, like, a supreme, like, you got to love it. You got to really, really, like, enjoy it. And it's such a, like any form of writing, it's such a private thing. You know, it really is just you, and you're sitting there looking at the screen, and you got to bug out on the script. like in a way that, like, I'll go back, at least after I write them right away, you know, like when they're hot, and I'll go back and reread them to like get charged, because I can feel it. It's exciting for me. It's like being a kid playing with your, you know, little G.I. Joes again, or your little Transformers. Like, that's how it feels. If that's good for you, then you should try it. You know, I haven't asked any of them whether, you know, they'd be up for it. But I think, like, the love and the willingness to just, you know, like, to love it privately is a really important thing.
I'm curious a little bit about the process. I know earlier you guys were talking about how sometimes an arc will take 100 or 200 issues, and I'm wondering what the, I guess, planning, how much is planned in advance, how much do you leave room to fly by the seat of your pants issue by issue, and what the setup for that is for either of you. Thank you.
For me, it's different because there are no issues, right? So for me, it's just, I mean, it's a novel, and because it's a novel, it has to be complete. And it doesn't mean that the issues aren't. The issues are too, but they're complete with the assumption that there will be a continuation, right? And I can't necessarily make that assumption. It doesn't mean that there won't be. It just means that I can't make the assumption that there will be a continuation. So it needs to be a complete sort of thing. And so my planning is literally the planning that I make for any other novel, right? Story arc, right? It's like beginning, you know, you got your exposition, you build up, your rising action, falling, the exact same way. And I know that my universe, the universe that he's living in this moment, doesn't change at all, because it's literally going to be a week of his life or 2 weeks of his life, right? And so Brooklyn going to be Brooklyn when the book is over. Nothing is going, right? Like, Manhattan will not be destroyed to be rebuilt the next day, right? And none of that is sort of happening in my space, because I don't have to plan so far in advance. But I am curious about that, though, because it's different, I think. Or is it? I don't know.
No, quietly it's not, because you might get canceled.
Oh.
So quietly, no. No, seriously, you do, but you don't know if you're going to get to tell that story or not.
Yeah, that's true.
You know what I mean? You really don't. What I do is I write these 12-issue seasons, and I think about it that way. And I first started just with like a summary. Here's what I think happened this season. And then I go issue by issue, like scene by scene. Here's what I think happened in each scene. I'll do that for the entire. Rarely does it. And then I go to write. And when you go to write, you know what I mean? Then it might work. Like, that might work. But usually it doesn't. And you end up having to push scenes into other ones, or this shouldn't be a scene at all, or this needs to be done in a different way. You know, but I think it's, like, I think about the outline as a theory of what the world looks like. It's like I'm trying to, you know, it's like I'm in the woods and I'm trying to get out the woods. Here's my theory for how I get out the woods. Now, usually that's not the way out. But it's important to at least have a theory, to not just sort of be wandering through.
That's interesting.
So I'm a librarian, so I know all your guys' works. And I know that all of your literary works deal a lot with identity. So I really want to know, how did that translate into creating characters that have secret identities, let alone a secret country? So I'm curious to know how your past work in identity translated into these new characters.
Well, when I pick up T'Challa, he doesn't have a secret identity. And by the point, and you're right, I mean, at certain points, Wakanda is unknown, but at this point, it's actually known. So I'll defer again. I don't know what to do. I mean, she asked a question.
It's not your fault, you know. I think, for me, I wanted to focus more on, so look, Miles has a secret identity, right? And I like to deal with identity and all the different, you know, it's all the different facets in the stories. I think that when Miles puts on the mask, we know what's going to happen most of the time, right? When Spider-Man becomes Spider-Man, then he becomes Spider-Man. It's Spider-Man time, right? And we know, we have a good sort of base on what it's probably about to go down. He's about to kick some ass, right? Like that, we know there's a good chance that that's about to happen, right? So I wanted to focus mostly on what does it mean. So for most of the story is about what happens when that mask is off, and his secret identity of Spider-Man becomes this strange invisibility of being brown, right? And so, and the sort of the duality of that, it's like I put the mask on, and then I become a hidden figure, right? I'm Spider-Man. No one knows who I am under this mask. I take the mask off, and I go to school. He goes to a wealthy boarding school, which is what the way the story was written, right? He goes to a wealthy white boarding school. I take the mask off. I go to school every day. Yet I still feel like no one can actually see me. What does that mean, right? Why do I feel like my teacher still cannot see me, and I don't have on my costume? And so that was sort of how I wanted to kind of fool around with it a bit. This idea, the idea of invisibility in many spaces. Even in this community, the people in this neighborhood are dealing with invisibility. If you have a quote unquote affliction or an addiction or a mental difference, right? In his neighborhood, you're seeing these characters and how they're being seen as invisible by the community, right? And all that. So all of that, when it comes to identity, is how I tried to weave all those things in. It's a tough question.
I think it's our last one. I don't know where the mic is, but.
James Haynes, I'm thinking, so for Jason, in flipping genres from normal novels you write to superheroes, what does superheroes allow you to explore that the genre flip does? And for Ta-Nehisi, medium flipping from writing prose to writing comics, what does the medium of comics allow you to explore that you can't do with just prose and just essay?
Yeah, I mean, for me, it's like the difference between fiction and nonfiction. And I prefer, I think, at this point right now, although I'm not done with it, I actually prefer the fiction. I mean, because you're always, and like I said, I think all art in some way makes an argument, you know? But in fiction, the argument is buried deep. Like, it can't be, you know, on top. You know what I mean? Like, the themes are really, really buried in a way that when you're doing nonfiction, that they're on top. You know, this is where we're going, this is where we're, and it's explicit. You know, I enjoy burying the argument. You know, I mean, one of the tired things about, you know, what I do at The Atlantic is, you know, you spend all your time working on something, on a particular thing, and then you end up debating with people who basically read it and spend 30 minutes thinking about it. You know, in comics, well, unless you're the sort of person that seeks that out, and there are people that seek that out. There are comic creators who seek it out. I'm not one of them. But in comics, you write it, you know what I mean, and then you move on. You're on the next. You express what you wanted to express. You hope people feel it. But there's no back and forth, I guess. You know, people write, you know, criticism, and that's fine. But I feel like I'm a lot more detached from it than, you know, when it's nonfiction. And so I enjoy being, like, sort of out of it.
It's because you don't be on Twitter like that. You know? The back and forth is happening, bro. You know?
I do, but I don't do it about comics. You can't go back and forth about
no,
comics.
You can't.
You're in trouble.
No, you can't.
You have gone down a K-hole. You are in deep trouble when you start doing that.
You know what, man? For me,
and then they'll get in your head. See,
no,
like it'll get in your head, and it'll change how you write, and you gotta protect that space. You know.
Listen, a word from you, brother. I appreciate that. It's true. For me, man, the big. So I normally write contemporary realistic fiction. So the beauty of writing is that it gave me an opportunity to create, to find like the metaphor in magic, which I never get to fool around. I just don't normally fool around with. I don't normally write anything that has to do with anything supernatural. I've been wanting to for a very long time. I just haven't gotten the courage up to do so. And so this gave me an amazing excuse to sort of say, well, if he can do superhuman things, what can we build around that which is superhuman to make the point, right? Or to say the thing, right? Or to make the argument. And so using his magic abilities, using his superhuman strength, using the spidey sense, using his ability to to camouflage himself, which Miles has. Using those things, I was able to sort of make that argument in a way that I don't know if I've ever been able to in some of my other novels. And so that gave me it was fun. It was fun in a different way. Especially as a poet, we always looking for the metaphor. You know what I mean? So it was really cool. Appreciate y'all.
Thanks, guys. Thank you so much.
Appreciate y'all.